Tranquil and timeless, the scenic route through South America delights the traveller with images from another age. Throughout the continent, millions upon millions of peasants worked like this, scraping at the earth for survival. But in the mountains of Peru, the image deceives. This land is known not for calm, but conflict. This is an ancient ritual, the breaking of the land for cultivation. Until 10 years ago, the peasants were in bondage to the landlord, rewarded at feasts with beer and a band. The beer and the band remain, but the landlord is gone, driven out. Now, this is a cooperative. The ritual has become a family celebration of freedom. Hilario Gallegas is a descendant of the Indian tribes which once possessed Peru, before the Incas and before the Spanish who conquered this land 400 years ago. It is a bitter history. The Indians have been serfs for centuries. Felipe Adua was reared in a closed world where justice and freedom had no meaning. Now the peasants here are equal, one with another. There is no outward change. Lucre is still governed by the seasons, and the past still echoes here. All over Peru, haciendas crumble. 15,000 feudal lords gone. The rooms where they entertained, silent. No revenge, no destruction, but eloquent neglect.
The man who owned this estate was not thought to have been particularly vicious or cruel. His behaviour was much as you might expect from someone who virtually owned his peasants. He could require them to work on his land for no pay. He could hire them out to other landlords who paid him for their labour. If he sold the estate, he would expect to sell them along with the land. If they offended him by losing a sheep or not working hard enough, he could confiscate their possessions, take away their homes, and even imprison them in his own private jail. By the end of the 60s, it was becoming apparent to most Peruvians, if not to the landlords, that this system of exploitation would have to be overthrown.
The revolution began in 1968. It was led by the army, by soldiers pledged to liberate the people. General Velasco became president. While Washington looked on askance, Moscow and Peking saluted this upheaval in South America. Velasco promised to take the wealth of the country from the few who had and give it to the many who had not. In Peru, wealth was land, and land, proclaimed Velasco, belonged to the tiller. The peasants were ecstatic. But why generals leading a revolution from the left? One of them was a tank commander, Leonidas Rodriguez.
Yo creo que en alguna forma sí, pero fundamentalmente era una identificación de los militares con la explotación de los campesinos.
Fundamentally, the military were aware that the peasants were exploited.
Del Perú. Y esto debido fundamentalmente a que
This was because most of us came from the lower classes.
Proceden de capas sociales bajas, de la clase media y aún de familias de la clase populares. Y debido también a...
And at the same time, our duties took us to all parts of the country, and this kept us in direct contact with the state of our people.
Y por esta razón es que hemos estado siempre en contacto con la realidad.
We were always looking at the real face of Peru.
Del Perú, con la cara del Perú.
This was the face of Peru. In 10 years, it has barely altered. The peasants are still isolated, their existence primitive. There is a difference. Hilario Gallegos was born here 52 years ago. As a child, he worked 12 hours a day shelling maize until his hands bled. His pay, 1 piece of bread. Even 10 years ago, he was still on 3 pence a day. But now, he calls no one master.
Señora, hija, skeki, wasquita, Elsa.
His wife, Maria, makes beer in the same house where the families lived for more than 100 years. They're still desperately poor, but no longer degraded.
We worked hard, but we lived in misery. We had to clothe ourselves because the owner never gave us anything. He didn't even send us to school, which is why none of us can read or write. We were beaten up for the slightest mistake. If 2 of us had a set to, the owner would punish us with a thrashing. If we were granted an audience with the master, we would say to him, "Good morning, Father, I would like to talk to you." And the master would answer, "What's all this about? Do you work on my land? Do you live in one of my houses or out in the fields?" When we told him our names, he'd tell us to get out, saying, "I don't need you. I only want workers here, not layabouts." He never ever listened to us. He maltreated and humiliated us.
At the celebration, a speech. "Brothers, this land is ours. It's our gold and our silver." Saturnino Huillca is a legend in this land. The old man offers his audience a peasant gospel which he's been preaching for half a century. Before the revolution, Saturnino was a wanted man, on the run for 40 years, a subversive among the people. His message now, after 10 years, the revolution is still to be won. We have our land, but not justice. In what was once their master's garden, the peasants clear the undergrowth to sow the land. The cooperative has 150 members. Their pay is 30 pence a day. To earn more, they must sell more. There's no spare land, so they need higher yields. fertilizer, drainage, more investment. How to raise the money? The revolution never planned for that. With no profit, there's no investment. The cooperative is in trouble. In the old drawing room, a committee meeting. These men are elected to run the estate, and they're worried. They're at the mercy of middlemen. Merchants who buy their crops at prices which don't match the cost of production. They avoid the issue, preserving the illusion that all will somehow be well. Instead, they discuss repairs to the barn door. In the meeting, Gallegos sounds confident. In private, he expresses a disillusion that is widely felt.
The rise in prices has been so great that our lives are a disaster. For instance, sugar, rice, salt and oil are terribly expensive. A bread roll costs up to 5 pence. Meat is 50 pence a kilo. We can't get these things. A peasant's life is a life of misery. Of course, we've made some progress with the cooperative, but how can we possibly be happy when we're still hungry?
Scattered on the mountain around the cooperative are the strips of land which each peasant works for himself. Here, Felipe Adua grows food for his family to eke out a wage from the cooperative of £2 a week. Unless he's paid more, Felipe will surely leave the cooperative, retreat into a life of subsistence only, and try to grow more on his own plot. In the evening, Felipe returns from the mountain. He has worked all day, every day, since he was 6, like his father and his grandfather before him. His wife, Guinareda, waits to serve him. The revolution gave the peasant political rights, but Felipe's home is still without light or water or sanitation. Felipe is a worried man. His family is short of food. They eat no breakfast, they buy no bread. They live on maize and potatoes and beer. I'm a free man, he says, but my life is a humiliation. Look at us, it's shameful. I'm tired. How I'm tired. It's a bleak existence. Felipe escapes with music. Sometimes I get home at night, I see that my family is safe, and for a moment I'm happy. So I play my flute. In Lima, the capital city, the old owners of Peru managed to survive the revolution which dispossessed them. They remember the old days with nostalgia, when 1/10 of the population owned almost 9/10 of the wealth. They still resent the loss of their estates. And the last 10 years they recall with dismay. Juan Pardo belongs to an illustrious family. His ancestors were conquistadors and sired presidents of the Republic. Pardo was heir to one of the largest estates in the country until the revolution took his land.
Well, obviously it was a very big shock to the family, not only mentally, but also obviously economically. It was the biggest business in the family, and it was built up with great effort and great dedication over many, many years by members of my family who dedicated their lives to developing this thing and putting it, to making it into what it ended up being.
How did they actually take it over? What happened?
No, there was no advice whatsoever. The army took over one day, and that was it. The family left, and then the Minister of Agriculture came and declared that it had been expropriated, and it was going to become a cooperative, and so on and so forth.
On what was once the Pardo estate, the sugarcane is cleansed by fire before harvest. This plantation is now a cooperative with 3,000 workers and 20,000 acres. The pay here is upwards of £1 for cutting 8 tons of cane a day. Peru needs these men. From 12 cooperatives like this, they export sugar to the world. If the political heart of the revolution is in the mountains, then its economic lungs are here. But here, too, the revolution is gasping for breath. The estates are in decline, losing money, bankrupt, or buried in debt. Even with the will, it will be hard to recover. But 4 years ago, the momentum of reform was arrested. The revolution went into reverse. In 1975, the people took to the streets. Their hero had been deposed. Another regime now ruled, new generals. Soon after his fall, Velasco died, his work unfinished. The people mourned the death of a dream. The new Peru still unbuilt, the old not yet dismantled. And now the nation was to be marched in the opposite direction. General Rodriguez, the architect of agrarian reform, was forced to resign and driven into exile. Now he's back in opposition, surrounded by memories of a revolution which survives only in name.
The new government threw in its lot with the great landowners of the past, who had by now become involved in finance and industry. Their pretext was that this alliance alone could solve the economic crisis in Peru. So they deliberately ignored the fact that their policies inflicted great suffering upon the mass of the people.
Not everyone has suffered. Those who were dispossessed 10 years ago are back again. Not in land, but in industry, commerce and property, which the revolution never reached. The Pardo brothers have just built a new factory. The family now has 40 companies. One is cautious but hopeful.
You see, at the beginning of the revolution, it was very unexpected. It was very, I don't like to use the word disorganized, but we think that the country is now being managed in a very, much more professionally and with more order. And with the new promotion laws for export and so on, we find that the building of a factory like this today in Peru is something that could have great success in the long term and also in the near future.
And the loss of the land no longer hurts. Sugar is in a shambles. The world price has collapsed. Nor is the crisis confined to sugar. Rescued from revolution, Peru has stumbled into a slump, a severe recession ordered by the money men to restore the country's status in the marketplace. Recessions impoverish the poor. The peasants, most of the population of Peru, are back where they were 10 years ago. The husbands drift from the estate to the city in search of work. The young men waste in idleness. No prospect for the children. The baby is sick and weak and likely to die. Matilda Chapi Igeri lived here in Pardo's time and through the revolution. Her husband is in the cooperative, but she detects no change in their life.
My husband works simply to provide us with rice. We get some from the cooperative, but it's not nearly enough. We have to buy rice, sugar, lard and meat. We always need more. And there's the cold. It's hot now, but in the winter, it's unbelievable trying to keep the cold out. We all get sick. Our health is always delicate. Our hopes are for a day's work. They say they're putting the wages up soon, but I don't know. One day you have hopes, the next day you don't.
Up in the mountains, the spirit which led the revolution is not yet broken. Ten years ago, Avelino Mar celebrated the revolution arm in arm with the generals. Today, at a meeting banned under the state of emergency, the peasants' leader denounces the military dictators for murdering his people by starvation. Oh yes, he says. We've had land reform, but our poverty continues. And who gets rich while we go hungry? It's the military elite and their friends, the capitalists and the imperialists. For Avelino, the landlords are one link in a long chain of exploitation. The audience is impassive, even suspicious. They've been urged to revolution before, and where did it get them? The army too is against them now. Would they risk an uprising? We must fight with a clenched fist. Avelino knows their doubts. He knows too that these peasants have fought before and still keep their guns and would use them to protect their rights. He urges them to unite in the struggle for a new society. Is it rhetoric, wishful thinking, or a warning from the mountain?
Yo creo que los campesinos van a luchar por sus derechos. Ya tienen conciencia de lo que tienen.
I believe that the peasants will fight for their rights. They understand what their rights are, and they're determined to defend them.
Y van a defenderlos. En general, yo diría que si el gobierno sigue a la derecha y el próximo gobierno...
I would say that if the government continues to move to the right, and goes on dismantling the reforms that we made, then there will be violence. When people are exploited, when they see the huge gulf between rich and poor, and experience the complete absence of social justice, they are bound to fight. The violence could easily come from either side, from the peasants or from the army.
De la represión por las fuerzas policiales.
Tranquil, timeless, or once more on the road to conflict? 10 years ago, the revolution promised a new age. It banished landlords. But the misery remains. The peasants now realize that their revolution never was, that they must start again. But will they? In South America, that's always the question. Or is the suffering of this generation to be passed on to the next?